Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a comic book graphic novel that I read. I am back on that graphic novel grind, exploring some more graphic novels and comic books, which I have been wanting to do for, since I really started this booktube channel, and I love that I've had that opportunity. Today, I want to talk about a story that is about superpowered humans and people in electronic, ultra-powered suits, of all things. I am referring to Iron Man Extremis by Warren Ellis with art by Adi Granov. And here is the cover for that. Looks pretty nice. For those who don't know, Warren Ellis is a comic book writer predominantly. He has consulted in movies as well, especially Iron Man 3, which is the basis for, or it was a loose adaptation of the Extremis storyline, not very faithful as I found in this specific story. And he's also written for video games as well. He wrote Dead Space, which was published in 2008, which a lot of people love as a video game. I haven't played it, but I respect the adoration that it has, and so I think that's pretty amazing that he's been able to hop between different mediums with success. Unfortunately, he has also had accusations of sexual misconduct been thrown at him in the past about sexual coercion, which he has admitted to and regretted in various statements. People have spoken out about him. I don't know if that makes it better or worse that he's accepted responsibility and blame for this, but it's better than somebody not doing that and pretending it's okay and then electing that person president or something like that. But it's important that we acknowledge that that's what happened to Warren Ellis. I didn't realize that beforehand, so otherwise I might have avoided this. Maybe not. I don't know for sure, but let's just move on from that for now. Without further ado, let's talk about Extremis. I will do a summary, a brief analysis, and we will move on from there. So Iron Man Extremis primarily focuses on Iron Man, who else? Tony Stark. Although in this continuity, nobody knows that Tony Stark is Iron Man. I think the movies are the only ones to really say that out loud. The MCU movies. But people believe that Iron Man is Tony Stark's bodyguard and that he's being supported with funds from Tony Stark himself. But at the start of the story, two men give a man named Mallen a serum of an unknown quality, which has an unknown effect. All that we know is that he's rapidly changing, and the two men run out of the room before we see what happens to that person. But we later find out that he was given a super soldier serum that made him a bit more powerful, and now he's going to wreak havoc on everything. Meanwhile, at a pharmaceutical company, Dr. Killian writes a note talking about how he gave up the Extremis formula and how he does not want to be interrogated or take responsibility for this. So he ends up killing himself, and he's discovered by his colleagues, who find out that he's given away the Extremis formula to terrorists, essentially. Meanwhile, Tony Stark is being interviewed by a noted documentarian who questions him about his previous work as an arms dealer, noting that Stark Industries is no longer doing that, but also highlighting how the Iron Man suit is still weapons. They point out that even though he's trying to give up the arms industry, he's using repulsor weapons, which Tony Stark says are being used for other things, but it's clear that it's still being used in a weapons-based capacity. So that kind of question is being posed throughout the entire story here. He's facing additional pressure from the board to either step down in a symbolic role, or to just straight up restart weapons manufacturing at Stark Industries, which he does not want to do. He also runs into an old friend named Maya, who worked at the pharmaceutical company and is trying to figure out who stole the Extremis formula, which she wants to have back before anything bad can happen. And as they're talking about it, the person who was injected with the Extremis formula attacks an FBI building and proceeds to kill and harm a lot of people. He's even shown shooting fire from his mouth, so he's pretty powerful, and he's not on the side of good. This results in Tony Stark suiting up as Iron Man and leaving to go fight that man on a highway. It's a pretty amazing battle, beautifully illustrated, but unfortunately, Mallen ends up beating Iron Man this time and severely injuring Tony. He's internally bleeding at this point in the story, and he's taken back to the pharmaceutical company, where he requests that the woman inject him with the Extremis formula so he can have better control over his suit. Meanwhile, Mallen heads to DC because, as it turns out, his family was part of a domestic terrorist organization, and he wants to take down the government and make sure that only his kind of people have power, which sounds oddly familiar. Meanwhile, Tony takes the Extremis formula, which does severe damage to him, but it allows him to become even stronger, where it's shown that he's kind of telepathically controlling the Iron Man suit, which, given that he never really separates from the Extremis formula, would indicate that that's a permanent fixture throughout the rest of the stories. I'm not 100% sure if this is like a one-shot or a continuity-based thing, but it's pretty unusual. And we see a flashback to Tony's origins, where he was kidnapped by terrorists in the Middle East, I think it was, and he built a suit with his friend, who was also kidnapped, and he ends up escaping, but the man dies in the process. And so he really reflects on how he's changed and his origin compared to maybe Mallen's origin. And so Tony is ultimately very powerful, and he flies off to Washington, D.C. and fights with Mallen, but this time he is successful and kills Mallen, even though he didn't want to do that in the first place. He specifically is shown kicking Mallen while he's dead, saying, "Why did you make me do that?" He ends up flying back to the pharmaceutical company, where he has Maya arrested, because as it turns out, both she and Dr. Killian were wanting to sell the Extremis formula as a means of getting more funding for their research, so that they could one day get out of weapons manufacturing, which is the theme of this entire story. And it ends with Maya pointing out that Tony is no different than her, that they both came from these dark, low places of basically being death merchants. And Tony, as the story ends, notes that he is trying to be better, and this Iron Man suit is hopefully going to help him do that. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's mainly one theme at the heart of this story. And it's the idea of destruction in the arms industry, the idea of a death merchant, or maybe even redemption. Because Tony and Maya, throughout the initial start of their careers, they both get money for funding weapons creation. Tony was leading Stark Industries, created a whole bunch of unique missiles and other wonderful weapons that the military used to kill civilians and insurgents in overseas. I think it's depicted as Iraq and Afghanistan in this story. And Maya is really no different. They had no problem initially, but after certain events in their lives, they were reflected on where they came from, and they realized they didn't want to be that anymore. They both want other things. There's an interesting section in this story where they go visit a friend who starts talking about transhumanism and all kinds of things like that, which Warren Ellis is known for. He implements those ideas in multiple other comics that he's written for. But it's like the idea that the Tony's suit might bring about more positive changes, but he has to stop thinking about it as a weapon first. And so that's what they want. They want to build up their reputation and become known as something more than the people who brought death upon the planet. And they also want to secure a future for the human race too, because they want to build technologies that are going to move humankind forward. So very noble goals. And this Iron Man suit is seen as that redemption for Tony. And the Extremis formula might be redemption for Maya, because it might lead to greater and better things once Tony stops the Extremis formula. That maybe something better will happen to her. I'm not quite sure about the logic there. In the Iron Man suit, it might bring greater things because it can help build bridges or stuff like that. But is this suit really his redemption? I think is the heart of this story. A lot of good questions being asked there. And there's a great quote that I would like to read to you from this. I see. How many of these devices led you to the design of the Iron Man suit? I think everything was leading me towards the Iron Man. Is it a military device? I don't think so. But in keeping with your other inventions, it certainly has military applications. Everything has military applications. All tools have a destructive potential. And the Iron Man suit certainly possesses awesome destructive potential, doesn't it? I mean, I don't see a benign side to your patented repulsor technology. Actually, the repulsor has application to cheap, non-chemical space launch. I see. And are you developing that? Not at this time. And that's the documentarian and Tony Stark talking about what he's done in the past and what he's doing with the Iron Man suit now. And Tony notes that the Iron Man suit is capable of great things outside of weapons and bringing death. And the documentarian asks him, straight up, are you working on that? And Tony's like, not at this time. And the art, you can see Tony is kind of ashamed of that. He wants to be doing more, but he's not. And so I think the Iron Man suit is seen as his redemption, but it's not happening for him. Maybe that's all Tony Stark knows, is how to do destruction and bring down hellfire, and anything else just isn't possible for him. And there's no resolution at the end of this story. It's like Tony Stark is like, there's going to be hope for me one day, but it really doesn't seem like the Iron Man suit is capable of anything but destruction. When he's fighting with Mallen on the highway, you see him destroy several cars, hurting people presumably in the process. And so it seems like the writers kind of want to have their cake and eat it too, by making it seem like there's hope for Tony, but also clearly demonstrating that the Iron Man suit is nothing but destruction. And I don't think you can have it both ways. But also, it's clear that Warren Ellis isn't letting Tony off the hook. This is something that the reader is meant to think about and deal with, and I like that. It's different from the MCU because it doesn't seem like Disney or Marvel, the current Marvel, really wants to reckon with the fact that Tony Stark is an arms manufacturer who felt guilt about it, but yet he's still committed to making the Iron Man weapon and bringing down hellfire. It doesn't matter how helpful he's trying to be. He created Ultron in the MCU. He destroyed Sokovia. He destroyed large parts of many cities in his effort to stop bad guys, hurting more people in the process. So the Marvel movies try to address that, but they skirt around the issue by saying that Tony Stark is a good person and giving him a family in the end, even though he hasn't reckoned with these issues that he is. And that's very important, because if your good guy is still causing harm, and if you're trying to get around the fact, like in Tony Stark's case, that he was an arms manufacturer, and you're trying to make it seem like he's doing good now, but he's still causing harm, he's maybe not the best choice as a hero. And superheroism shouldn't be like a disguise for the military to hide the fact that they're trying to recruit you, like that it's okay for people to do this under the banner of a military mercenary force. But I don't think Warren Ellis is going that far, but I do think that those are the deeper layers of Marvel comics in general, of Iron Man. Especially because he's a rich person with this very powerful suit, and that has to be reckoned with. And I think that Warren Ellis does a good job, but I do think there's deeper that you can go here. Another element of the story is Mallen. Mallen is a great villain, I think. Very powerful. Certainly not the most extravagant villain that you might see in a comic book. Just a regular guy. But what I like about him is his unrepentant racism, in that he's a domestic terrorist who was given power, and he's going to do what any domestic terrorist does now: overthrow the government and hopefully make sure that his kind of people are in power, because Ellis has him speaking about how the Ku Klux Klan are actually good people or something like that. And it's clear that Mallen is a racist, he's a white supremacist, and he's kind of the opposite of Tony, in that if Tony were evil, and he got the kind of power that he did, he would turn into Mallen, and that's even reflected in Tony's own words, where he says, like, "You're my nightmare. Like, if I hadn't changed who I was, I would turn out to be very similar to you, being a force for destruction rather than potentially creation." So I do like Mallen as that opposite to Tony, but also a reflection of how, power in the wrong hands is going to hurt more people than it's going to help. And then the last thing we're talking about is the art in this story, which you've probably seen all around here. It's pretty fantastic art, kind of realistic, photorealistic in a sort of way, where they're going for, not so cartoonish, but like maybe a depiction of how Tony Stark might actually look. It's very clear that they're going for Robert Downey Jr. or something like that. But I like the art. Adi Granov makes pretty quality art. It makes me want to check out more from him. So I think the art, and especially that battle scene where Tony Stark and Mallen are fighting, is worth the price of admission. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Extremis by Warren Ellis. I definitely recommend that you seek this one out. It's probably the best, non-Batman comic that I've read, and non-Neil Gaiman comic that I read, which is a qualifier, but it's still pretty good. I think I'm going to have more positive memories of this one than anything else. And I do think it's important to check out stuff that isn't just Batman or Neil Gaiman. So I probably want to check out the Demon in the Bottle storyline that I've heard so much about next from Iron Man, see what that's about. And again, check out more comics that aren't just Batman. If you have any recommendations, or you want to, tell me what you thought of my review, do so in the comments. Let's have a discussion about Extremis. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and, this comic series if they don't know about it already. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and irony travels. Farewell.